Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you're all safe, sound, and healthy. And I was just talking and thinking and considering a lot of things that we've touched upon in the previous podcasts, and also things that recently I've had conversations regarding, and events that have happened recently. For example, the Indian Muslim doctor who was observing parda. In other words, she was observing the hijab, niqab, and the Indian minister who tried to snatch the niqab off of her face. And as I said, I don't care what anybody says, but the expression on his face and the expression on the other men around him, it reeked of sexual assault. Okay, and it is a violation in any case. I don't know what kind of culture the pure Hindus have. Okay, I have personally known a lot of Hindus in my entire life, and I have never seen a fanatic Hindu. I have seen practicing Hindus, and as I said, I'm very good friends, or I have been very good friends with practicing Hindus, and I don't see them falling into this category. So this I would call fanatic Hindus, or as we know, there's a particular name for these kind of extremist Hindus who believe in their own fanatic form of Hinduism, which is basically akin to Zionism. Let's put it this way. So, keeping all of that in mind, I would say that I don't know what kind of a fanatical Hindu culture the Indian Prime Minister has been trying to build in India, but we know that he himself was the butcher of Gujarat. He's the one who personally led and participated in the massacre of the Gujarati Muslims. And because we know Gujarat is essentially a Muslim dominated area or a Muslim majority area, so that massacre in Gujarat was a huge problem. Again, Bihar has been a recent scandal because Bihar is also one of those states that has been originally Muslim majority. Assam, Bihar, Gujarat, these were those states that opted for Pakistan anyway, as we know, especially, Assam and Bihar and Kashmir. And so there are about 5 to 6 states of India that were originally supposed to be part of Pakistan, but they have been occupied till date by India. So the massacres, the ongoing radicalization within these states is understandable with the radical Hindu point of view. As they're doing the same in occupied Kashmir, as we can see. So what I would say is that I think people need to understand that in Islam, the first law, there's a first law behind all laws. We call it the foundation. Okay, so the foundation, the fundamental law behind all laws is you cannot force somebody to do something he does not want to. You cannot even force somebody to believe in God if he doesn't want to. You cannot force somebody to have a faith if he doesn't want to. Yes. And you cannot force somebody to pray if he doesn't want to. You cannot force anybody to do anything, period. The minute you force or convince somebody to do something, you will take credit, yes, but it's credit for a sin that you have committed. It is an unforgivable sin. There are a lot of unforgivable sins, and the only one of those unforgivable sins is one that pertains to God himself, as in, if you take anybody equal to God in any form, that means if you have deities, or if you believe that God has a family, or if you believe that he has a son or a daughter or whatever, or he has helpers or assistants, any such belief is shirk, right? And that is the one unforgivable sin that is between you and God. Otherwise, God says he can forgive any and every sin, any and every trespasses that is between you and him, or that is between you and yourself, right? Which is again essentially between you and him, except taking somebody else to be equals, to be his equal, in other words, right? Now, moving on, the rest of the unforgivable sins are all to do with your trespasses against humanity. Yes, every single one. Forcing human beings to do something they don't want to do, forcing them to believe in something they don't want to believe, forcing them to think something they don't want to think. So, forcing domination, imperialism, not allowed, unforgivable sin, right? In that, so that is where then you can understand that dictatorship can never be allowed in Islam, because you are forcing yourself onto others. You're forcing people to accept you as your leaders. They have not chosen you. So it is an unforgivable sin. Now, within this falls in the category of the hijab niqab. It is essential for you to understand that. The hijab niqab thing is between the woman and God. And it is not punishable by law. Also understand this, yes. Because again, in Islam, what is the fundamental law? You cannot force somebody to do something he doesn't want to. So, something that is a personal act is a personal act, and law cannot be made to force that person to conform to that individual or personal act. And this is why in Muslim countries you will notice that there is a huge variation in the way women dress. This is again something I've touched upon many times. And that is because what? You cannot tell a woman how to dress. The only thing that men and women both have to conform to is modest dressing. It is not just for women, it's for men. Okay? Men must be modestly dressed too. Modesty is inherent in our religion. It's inherent in all religions, by the way. If people have chosen to let go of it, that's their own problem. But it has always been inherent in every single religion, polytheist or monotheist. Now, again, keeping that in mind, if a girl chooses to dress modestly, but she does not observe the hijab, she does not observe the veil, in other words, or the screen, the parda, right? She does not observe the headscarf. She doesn't, but she dressed modestly. That is again her own problem. If she chooses not to dress modestly, that is again her own problem. That's the point here. We cannot judge her based on how she dresses. In fact, the onus is on the person who judges, by the way. Yes, again, the sin falls not on the girl or the man who are dressing in their own way, but the sin falls on the people who are judging them. I have quoted this hadith many times. I've quoted this tradition many times, where there was a woman who rushed out of her house without taking without taking a shawl or an outer garment, or a hijab, or she was in her normal clothing, which means that you could see her face, you could see her hair, you could see her hands and legs, which, I mean, not legs, but feet. Okay. Well, hands and feet you can always see anyway, they're exempt. Face is also exempt. I'm coming to that. But the point is, she was dressed in her normal clothing and she did not have time to put in a cloak. Okay, let's put it this way. She did not have time to cover her head. She did not have time to put an outer garment, because she saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, pass by and she was in a rush to catch him. And she needed to ask him something. And she was an extremely beautiful woman, according to the tradition. And when she rushed to him, he was with a companion of his. So he stopped for her. And his companion, his jaw literally dropped. She was that beautiful. But the Prophet did not send the woman back. He did not tell her, go back, cover yourself up properly, and then come to me. I'll wait here. No. He instead grabbed his companion by the chin. Yes, he grabbed his chin and he turned his face away. That gesture itself can tell you how offended the Prophet, peace be upon him, must have been at the man, at his companion. Although obviously it's not like the companion was lusting after her. I mean, it was a natural reaction, I guess, because as I said, she was so beautiful that the companion, well, he couldn't help himself, I guess. And so he just stared at her and his jaw dropped. And so the Prophet turned his face away. He did not reprimand the woman in any case. He reprimanded his companion. So the onus is on the companion. So in other words, the onus is on the onlooker. And that is why in the Quran it is said, lower your gaze in modesty. In other words, do not go around looking at what somebody is wearing, and do not go around judging other people, and do not go around staring at other people and just to see how they look and this and that. Keep your eyes down to the ground. Lower your eyes in modesty. And this is for both men and women. And this is why it is very odd when you see that in a country like ours, where we have converted to Islam, but we still have our, that ignorance amongst our population, especially in the villages. And you will see that kind of ignorance again in Europe and in America. Wherever you go, wherever there are villages or remote areas or small towns, you will see people just staring at you, and they make you uncomfortable. Obviously, they'll make you uncomfortable. And that is why in Islam you're not allowed to stare at other people. That is why it is bad form. And that is why it is practically written in the Quran that you should not stare at other people. Lower your gaze. So staring at people, in fact, is again one of those unethical acts that you can do. It goes against Islamic etiquette. It goes against social etiquette now in the modern world. People have recognized this fact that staring at other people is literally a form of invasion of their personal space. And in Islam, again, you cannot invade another person's personal space, which again, we come back to that. The minister trying to invade the personal space of a woman, a strange woman who he does not know. She is there to get her certificate to practice as a doctor. She's there because she's got the job. And he thought that gave him a good excuse to become all handsy. Yes, he was being handsy. When you try to grab a woman in any way, it is a sexual assault. Again, this is something that has been established by Islamic law, and this is a law that is now generally being established all over the world. The minute you invade a woman's personal space, it can be easily termed as a sexual assault or harassment, whatever you like to call it. So, the thing about women in Islam is that they have this privilege. Okay, what I'm trying to explain here is women in Islam have this privilege that if they want, they can show their face. If they want, they can choose to cover themselves up completely, even though actually in Islam, there is no concept of women covering themselves completely. There is no concept of women covering their faces completely. But at the same time, they are not forbidden from doing it, which means that this is a privilege that is given to women, that they can choose to cover themselves up completely, to cover their faces up completely, if they do not want to be seen, even in public. And nobody has the right to force them to do otherwise. Similarly, if a woman prefers to show her face in public, nobody has the right to tell her not to. This is a privilege that Islam has granted to women, and women alone, where nobody can force them to cover their face up, and nobody can force them to uncover their face up. Nobody can force them to wear the hijab, and nobody can force them to remove their hijab. Nobody can force them to dress in a particular way, and nobody can force them to dress in a certain way that conforms to the other person's personal tastes. This is a privilege that has been granted to Muslim women, which renders them free from all pressures of society. The whole idea was that they were supposed to be free from all pressures of society. Instead, the society has decided to use that against them and pressure them, especially non-Muslim society. You're talking about Muslim society? No. Muslim society at least has the decency to know that they have no right. But the non-Muslim society that talks about freedom of women and freedom of rights, which, by the way, they borrowed from Islam. They never had this concept before that. They literally borrowed this concept from Islam, and yet they're trying to use that against Muslim women. How can you talk about freedom of Muslim women, freedom of women? How can you talk about freedom of women and women rights when you are yourselves encroaching upon their personal space. You are violating their rights. You are violating their freedom. A woman is choosing to cover herself up. You are the one forcing her to uncover herself. You are violating her freedom to choose. You are forcing her to conform to you. That is the irony. I mean, I find this so ironical and so hypocritical of the Western society and of the non Muslim society, where they're constantly yapping about women's rights, but they are themselves the one violating these women's rights. And this every woman, Muslim or non Muslim, can see. It's so glaringly obvious. Every non Muslim woman, even, can see. And she's also like, what the frack? You're now going to tell us how to dress? Again, you see, it comes back to that. You're going to tell us how to dress? You want us to undress? Do you think we're sexual objects? Like, see, that was why the whole feminism movement, let me remind you, the feminism movement in the West began because they saw how the Muslim societies lived. The Ottoman Empire, the women in the Ottoman Empire, how they exercised their rights, how they inherited property, how they had jobs, how they did businesses, how they made investments, how they were in politics, how they were in administration, management, how they were part of the political administration, so how they were doctors and teachers, and how they built schools, and how they made up, so when they saw that women in the Muslim world, this is what they were practicing and exercising their rights. And this is basically what sparked the movement. Okay, the fact that this is a God-given right. And why is it that the women of the West, the non-Muslim, you know the predominantly Christian societies, and the Hindu societies, and the Buddhists, and the Zionist societies, obviously, as well, how they were taking away all these rights from the women, and how they were treating them as chattels, and how they were treating them as their property, and how they were not allowed to inherit their own money, and how they were not allowed to access their own money, manage their own money, invest their own money. And so their men were their guardians. In Islam, men are not our guardians. Men are our protectors. Yeah, the reason I had to choose these words is to better explain, because in Islam, although we roughly translate the word to guardian, but because the Christian society, I'm sorry to say, and the Zionist society have abused the term guardian over the centuries, they have abused that term so badly that now I have to now use the word protector. So men are supposed to be protectors. That is what it means in Islam. They're supposed to take care of their women. They're supposed to make sure that they are financially independent and they're provided for. They're supposed to make sure they have a house. They're supposed to make sure they have good clothes, good food. They're supposed to make sure that a woman lives a comfortable life. Even if the woman is richer than her husband. Yes, that's the whole point. Even if the woman is a businesswoman, even if she is richer than her own husband, even if she can afford millions of houses of her own, it is still her husband's responsibility to give her a house and to provide for her and to provide for his children. Yes, it's not even her duty to take care of her children. In Islam, it is his children, so it is his duty, so he has to take care of them. And if a woman takes care of her kids, this is considered one of the great kindnesses that the man has to acknowledge. So, there is always this thing that people seem to never understand, because again, the problem is that when the Western countries came and colonized these otherwise developed, prosperous, the then developed and civilized countries, Muslim countries, when they occupied them, they left their stamp, they left their stench, their colonial stench and stamp, where men saw that, oh, it was possible to treat women as a second-grade citizen. So those Muslim societies, actually, the men of the Muslim countries are scared of Islam. It's not the women. This is again something I've explained before. The men of these post colonial Muslim countries are afraid of bringing back Islam because, as the West has now seen, the West has borrowed Islam. It has borrowed Islamic values. It has borrowed Islamic way of life. It has borrowed the Islamic legal infrastructure. And you can see that men in the Western world now are also very, very, very unhappy with their status, isn't it? They want to go back to the pre-Islamic period. They want to go back to before they borrowed the whole Islamic infrastructure. And they want to go back to the time where they were superior people, where they were dominating, and where women were their properties. So you can see that on both sides of the world, men are unhappy with Islam. It's not the women. The women are extremely happy with the Islamic implementation, a proper, true Islamic implementation of a, or interpretation, you can say, of a society. Because in an ideal Islamic society, women have all the rights. They enjoy the privileges, they enjoy the rights, they enjoy their freedom, they enjoy everything. They can pick and choose, they can do whatever they want, and nobody can force them to do anything they do not want to. If a woman chooses to observe full parda, it is up to her, and nobody can force her otherwise. If a woman chooses to just cover her head and dress modestly, nobody can force her to do otherwise. If a woman chooses not to observe hijab, nobody can force her to do it, to do otherwise. Nobody. It's between her and God. It's one of those personal things that has no crime punishment consequences. Something that has no crime punishment consequences is deeply personal, and it can be understood that because there is no law and there cannot be any law forcing somebody. For example, there is no law in an Islamic society forcing you to pray 5 times a day. You must have realized that by now. Why? Why are you? I mean, you call yourself a Muslim country, but there's no law forcing you to pray 5 times a day. Understand that. Because in Islam, the fundamental law behind all laws is you cannot force somebody to do something he does not want to. Freedom to choose. Which, I'm sorry to say, most of our societies, most of our post-colonial societies, at one point or another have utterly and truly despicably failed. They've just failed to implement that. Because we're always being forced to do something that we don't want to. Parents are forcing children, which again in Islam is a great sin. It falls into that category, the same category. Unforgettable sin. Cannot force anybody to do anything. But parents are forcing their children because we prefer our Hindu culture over Islam. Islam makes parents very uncomfortable. The fact that they do not seem to have all those rights over their children that their ancestors who practiced Hinduism did, or Buddhism or Jainism or whatever. So that is making them so uncomfortable. So they give precedent to culture over religion. Similarly, you've got these people who call themselves your leaders, but they are, disregarding your mandate. They're stealing your mandate. And they are choosing people of their own. Again, America is choosing your leaders. Who is America to choose your leaders? This is Pakistan. We're a sovereign state. That's another thing. In Islam, no state can dominate another state because no individual can dominate another individual. The laws that are, the laws that pertain to individuals, pertain to families, pertain to societies, and then they pertain on a national level and then on a global level as well. So yeah, I thought that this is time that we once again, addressed this issue and made it very clear, because I've noticed people do not want to listen to things that they do not want to listen to, and they do not want to understand things that they do not want to understand. So they're very selective. Like how people have selective hearing. Yeah, that is what is the problem with people here. They have selective hearing. I will repeat. In Islam, the privilege that women have is If they choose to cover themselves up completely, even in public, nobody can force them to do otherwise. If they choose not to cover themselves up in public, nobody can force them to do otherwise. This is a privilege that is granted to women. And this is me signing out. Khuda Hafiz.